Have you ever thought about what happens when two people help each other reach heaven? Not just love each other on earth, but actually pull each other toward God? Teresa of Avila saw it. She saw the joy waiting for married couples who do this, and what she witnessed changed how she understood marriage forever. Teresa lived in 16th century Spain. Born Teresa Sanchez de Cepeda y Ahumada on March 28, 1515, in the walled city of Avila. Her mother died when Teresa was 14. Her father, Don Alonso, was a merchant who read spiritual books aloud to his children every evening. Teresa entered the Carmelite convent of the Incarnation in Avila when she was 20 years old on November 2, 1535. The convent housed 180 nuns at that time, most of them from wealthy families. It was comfortable, too comfortable, Teresa would later say. For decades, she struggled with prayer, with doubt, with illness that left her partially paralyzed for 3 years starting in 1538. The doctors bled her. They gave her potions, made from herbs and mercury. Nothing worked. She could not move her legs. She could barely swallow. Her father brought her home from the convent because everyone thought she was dying. She did not die, but she did not recover either. Not fully, not for years. Then something shifted. In 1554, at 39 years old, she had what she called her second conversion. She was praying in the convent oratory when she looked at a statue of Christ after the scourging, the wounds, the blood, the expression of suffering mixed with love. Something broke inside her. She fell to her knees weeping. She said later that in that moment she understood for the first time what it meant that God had suffered for her personally. Not for humanity in general, for her. After that, visions came. God showed her things most people never see. She saw heaven. She saw hell. She saw purgatory. She saw angels and demons fighting over souls. She saw the interior life of people walking past her in the street. She saw sins hidden for decades. She saw graces poured out in secret. And she saw marriages, dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. She saw what happened to couples after they died. One vision stands out above all the others. Teresa was in deep prayer, probably in the chapel at St. Joseph's Monastery in Avila, the first house she founded. She established St. Joseph's on August 24, 1562, with only 4 nuns and almost no money. The building was tiny. The chapel barely held 20 people, but it was there, in that cramped space with stone walls and narrow windows, that she saw something that would shape her teaching on marriage for the rest of her life. She described this moment in multiple writings, preserved in the archives of the Discalced Carmelites. In Rome, catalogued under the Teresian manuscript collection, and translated into 73 languages over 4 centuries, she saw a married couple standing together before the throne of God. Their faces were radiant, but not with the soft glow you see in paintings. This was different. This was light coming from inside them, she said, like their bodies had become transparent and something burning was shining through. She understood immediately, without being told, that they had spent their entire lives helping each other grow closer to Christ, every single day of their marriage. They prayed together every morning before dawn. They examined their consciences together every night before sleep. They forgave each other when forgiveness was hard. They sacrificed for each other, not out of duty or custom or fear, but out of love for God first and each other second. And the joy she saw on their faces was something she had never seen before, not in any other vision, not in any living person. She said it was joy multiplied by 2. Not added, multiplied, because they had earned it together. If you value documented stories from the lives of the saints like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the complete works of Saint Teresa held in the Biblioteca Nacional de España in Madrid, specifically the critical editions published between 1951 and 1959 under the direction of Padre Efren de la Madre de Dios and Padre Odger Stegink, along with manuscripts verified by her own spiritual directors, including St. John of the Cross and Padre Geronimo Gracian. Now back to the information. Teresa wrote that this couple's unity in heaven was not just emotional or sentimental. It was structural, architectural. They had built something together on earth that lasted into eternity. She saw that every time one of them chose patience over anger, every time one forgave instead of holding a grudge, every time one prayed for the other in secret, it added another stone to a palace they were building in heaven. She used that exact word, palace. Not house, not dwelling, palace. She described the rooms in detail, high ceilings, walls that seemed to be made of light compressed into solid form, floors that reflected everything but were not made of glass or mirror, windows that opened onto views she could not describe because the human language did not have words for what she saw, gardens inside the palace, fountains, corridors that went on forever, but somehow you could see the end from the beginning. She saw the couple walking through these rooms together, and their joy was multiplied because they had earned it together, not just existed in the same space for 50 years. Earned it, built it, stone by stone, prayer by prayer. forgiveness by forgiveness, sacrifice by sacrifice. Teresa said the reward for one who helps their spouse reach heaven is greater than the reward for someone who reaches heaven alone. She said this explicitly in a letter to her niece, Maria de San Jose, written in 1576. The letter is housed in the Carmelite archives in Seville, catalogued as manuscript number 47 in the Teresa Correspondence Collection. She said, God honors the sacrifice of carrying another soul when that soul does not want to be carried. She said, the deepest love a married person can show is not romance or affection or companionship. It is leading their spouse to confession when they resist. It is praying for them when they are cold toward God. It is staying when leaving would be easier. It is choosing holiness when compromise would be more comfortable. Teresa knew this was hard. She knew marriage could be a place of deep suffering. In 1567, she traveled to Malagon to found a new monastery. The journey took 6 days by cart over roads that were barely roads at all. Mud, rocks, bandits in the hills. She arrived on April 11th. The monastery building was not finished. The roof leaked. The windows had no glass. But Teresa started anyway because she always started anyway. There she met a woman named Catalina de Tolosa. Catalina was 38 years old. She had been married for 17 years to a man named Diego, who drank, who gambled, who ignored her for days at a time, who spent their money on dice games in the market square of Malagon every Saturday night. Catalina had no children. Diego blamed her for that. The doctors bled her twice a year, trying to fix whatever they thought was wrong. Nothing changed. She told Teresa she had prayed for Diego every single day since their wedding night. 17 years. She prayed the rosary for him every morning before he woke up. She fasted on Fridays and offered the hunger for his conversion. She went to Mass for him when he refused to go, which was almost always. She never told him she was doing it. She just did it, week after week, month after month, year after year. Then one day in March of 1568, Diego collapsed in the street outside the church. A stroke. His face went slack on the left side. He could not speak. He could barely move his right arm. Catalina found him lying in the dirt with a crowd of people standing around doing nothing. She got 2 men to carry him home. She laid him in their bed. She took care of him. For 2 years she washed him. She fed him. She turned him in the bed so he would not get sores. She read to him from the Gospel of Luke because that was the only book in the house besides a book of hours her mother had given her. Diego could not respond. He just stared at the ceiling. But she kept reading. Then something changed. It was subtle at first. She noticed his eyes following her when she read certain passages. The prodigal son. The woman caught in adultery. The good thief on the cross. She saw tears on his cheeks one day after she read about Zacchaeus climbing the tree to see Jesus. She asked him if he wanted her to keep reading. He blinked once. Yes. She read more. She read for hours. She started reading the Psalms, the penitential Psalms. Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. Diego started weeping every time she read that one. She asked him if he wanted to see a priest. He blinked. Yes. The priest came. Father Gonzalo from the Church of San Juan in Malagon. He heard Diego's confession. It took an hour. Diego could not speak, but he could nod, and Father Gonzalo asked yes or no questions, and Diego answered with his eyes, Do you repent? Yes. Do you want absolution? Yes. Do you believe Christ can forgive you? Yes. Father Gonzalo gave him absolution. He gave him the Eucharist. Diego received communion for the first time in 17 years. Catalina said his face changed when he swallowed the host. She said the hardness left. She said he looked like a child. 3 weeks later, Diego died. It was April 23rd, 1570. Catalina was sitting beside his bed reading Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. She got to the part about the valley of the shadow of death, and Diego stopped breathing. Just like that. One breath, then nothing. That night, Catalina had a dream. She saw Diego standing in a place filled with light. Not blinding light, soft light, warm light. He was smiling. He looked at her and said 3 words. You brought me here. She woke up weeping, not from grief, but from relief. She had done what God asked her to do. She had carried him. For 17 years she had carried him. And he made it. Teresa recorded this story in her letters. The original manuscript is kept in the archive of the Carmelite Monastery in Seville, document reference TS-ML47B. Scholars date it to June 1568 based on watermark analysis and comparison with other dated letters from that period. Teresa used Catalina's story to teach her nuns about the power of spousal intercession. She said that a wife's prayers for her husband, or a husband's prayers for his wife, have a special weight in heaven because they come from the sacrament. Marriage is not just a contract signed in front of witnesses. It is a channel of grace, a direct line to God. And when one spouse uses that channel to pull the other toward God, heaven responds. The prayers are heard differently. They carry more authority. Why? Because they are rooted in a vow that God himself witnessed. A vow that created a permanent bond. A bond that death does not break, only transforms. But Teresa also saw the opposite. She saw couples who lived together for decades and never once helped each other grow in faith. They were kind to each other. They provided for each other. They raised children. They paid their bills. They were comfortable. But they never talked about God. They never prayed together. They never challenged each other to be holy. They never asked each other hard questions. They never called each other out when one of them was slipping. They just coexisted, politely, quietly, safely. And when they died, Teresa said, they stood before God alone. Not condemned necessarily, not sent to hell, but alone. The joy they could have shared in eternity was cut in half because they had lived parallel lives instead of intertwined ones. They had been roommates, not partners, companions, not collaborators. They had wasted the grace of the sacrament by treating it like a business arrangement instead of a spiritual mission. She wrote about this in The Interior Castle, finished in 1577 after months of intense work in the Carmelite monastery in Toledo. She wrote the entire book in just 66 days between June 2nd and November 29th. She wrote during the brief windows of time between prayer and managing the reform of the Carmelite order and dealing with the Inquisition, which was investigating her for possible heresy because her visions made the authorities nervous. In the seventh mansion, the final section of the book, she said, the soul that reaches the deepest union with God often does so because someone else helped them get there. A spiritual director who corrected them, a friend who prayed for them in secret, a spouse who refused to let them give up. She said, isolation is one of the devil's favorite tools. He convinces people that holiness is a private journey, a solo race, a mountain you climb alone. But Teresa said, no. Holiness is communal. It requires witnesses. It requires people who love you enough to tell you when you are drifting. It requires accountability. It requires someone who knows you well enough to see through your excuses and call you back when you wander. In 1575, Teresa was in Beas de Segura, founding another monastery. She arrived in February. The weather was brutal. Snow in the mountains, ice on the roads. The building they were supposed to use for the monastery was occupied by someone else, so they had to negotiate for weeks. While she waited, people came to see her. They always came. Word spread fast when Teresa arrived in a town. A married couple showed up one afternoon. The husband, Rodrigo, was a merchant who traded in wool and leather. The wife, Beatrice, was pregnant with their fourth child. Her belly was large. She looked tired. They told Teresa they were struggling. Rodrigo worked long hours, sometimes traveling for weeks to markets in Seville and Granada. Beatrice felt abandoned. She was alone with 3 children under the age of 7. She was exhausted, angry, resentful. They barely spoke anymore. They had stopped going to confession together. They had stopped praying the rosary at night, something they had done every single night for the first 5 years of their marriage. They were good people. They went to Mass. They followed the rules, but they were distant. The marriage had become mechanical, functional, empty. Teresa listened. She did not interrupt. She let them talk for nearly an hour. Then she said something simple. She said, pray together every night for 10 minutes. Just 10. Do not ask for anything. Do not talk about your problems. Do not make lists. Do not bargain with God. Just thank Him together for 3 things from that day. 3 things. That is it. 3 things you're grateful for. Say them out loud. Take turns. One of you says one thing, the other says another, back and forth. For 10 minutes every night. No excuses. They looked at her like she was crazy. 10 minutes? That would fix everything? Years of distance and resentment and hurt solved by 10 minutes of prayer? She said, try it for 40 days. 40 days. Then come back and tell me what happened. They left. Teresa did not know if they would actually do it. Most people do not do the simple things you tell them to do because the simple things feel too small to matter. But 40 days later, they came back. Beatrice was in tears. She said they had not missed a single night. Not one. She said the first week was awkward. They sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to think of 3 things to be grateful for. It felt forced, artificial. But they did it. The second week was easier. They started noticing things during the day specifically so they could mention them at night. A sunrise, a child's laugh, a loaf of bread that came out of the oven perfectly. By the 3rd week, they started adding things. They started praying for their children by name. They started asking God to help them be patient with each other. They started confessing small sins out loud, not for absolution, but just for honesty. I was angry today. I was impatient. I was selfish. By the 4th week, they were praying for 20 minutes, sometimes 30, sometimes longer. Beatrice said, we feel married again. Not like we did at the beginning. Better, deeper. We know each other now. We see each other. Rodrigo said something Teresa wrote down word for word. He said, I forgot that she was on the same journey I was on. I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one trying to get to heaven. I forgot she was trying too. I forgot we were supposed to help each other. Teresa underlined that sentence in her journal. I thought I was alone. The original page is housed in the convent of Saint Teresa in Avila, under glass, in a climate-controlled display case, because it has been handled so many times by pilgrims over 4 centuries that the ink is fading. Conservators have photographed it and digitized it, but the physical page is still there, yellowed and fragile, with Teresa's handwriting slanting across the lines. This is what Teresa saw in her vision of the married couple in heaven. They were not alone. They had walked the road together. And because they walked it together, the joy waiting for them was double, multiplied, compounded, eternal. Teresa also talked about how married people are called to be saints just as much as priests and nuns. She said this in 1576 during a conversation with John of the Cross, her closest collaborator in reforming the Carmelite order. They were in Avila, planning the foundation of a new monastery, and someone asked if married people could reach the same level of holiness as religious. John hesitated. Teresa did not. She said, "Of course they can. Marriage is a sacrament. It is a path. It is not easier than religious life. It is harder in some ways. You do not get to escape to a cloister. You have to become a saint in the middle of dirty dishes and crying children and bills that do not get paid. You have to become a saint while your spouse is annoying you, while your in-laws are judging you, while your body is failing and your patience is gone. That is the arena. That is where you fight." And she said the spouse who helps their partner become a saint is doing the work of a spiritual director. They are guiding a soul. They are shaping eternity. And God sees that. God honors that. Teresa had a friend named Doña Guiomar de Ulloa, a widow who lived in Avila. Guiomar had been married for 12 years before her husband died of fever in 1553. She told Teresa that her husband had been a difficult man. He was proud. He was stubborn. He refused to admit when he was wrong. But Guiomar loved him, so she prayed. She prayed for years. She prayed that God would soften his heart. She prayed that he would go to confession. She prayed that he would stop treating their servants so harshly. Nothing changed. Years passed. She kept praying. Then one night, her husband woke up screaming. He said he had a dream that he was standing at the edge of a cliff, and something was pulling him over. He said he could feel the heat rising from below. He said he looked down and saw faces, millions of faces, all of them screaming, and he realized he was about to join them. Then a hand grabbed him. He turned and saw Guiomar. She pulled him back from the edge. He woke up. He told her the dream the next morning. He was shaking. He said, "You saved me." She said, "I have been praying for you every day since we married." He stared at her. He said, "Why?" She said, "Because I love you, and I want to see you in heaven." He went to confession that week. He changed. He started going to daily mass. He started reading scripture. He started treating people with kindness. He lived 2 more years after that dream, and when he died, Guiomar said she had no fear for his soul. She knew where he was. Teresa wrote about Guiomar in her book of Foundations, completed in 1582, just months before her death. She used Guillomar's story to teach her nuns that prayer for others, especially for those bound to us by sacrament, is never wasted. She said, even if the person does not change, even if they die in sin, the prayer still has power. It lightens their suffering in purgatory. It moves the heart of God. It builds treasure in heaven for the one who prayed. If you are learning something new from this story, make sure to subscribe. It helps us continue making these videos. Also drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. This research is verified through the writings of Teresa preserved in the Royal Monastery of the Incarnation in Avila, and cross-referenced with testimonies from the beatification process documented in the Vatican Secret Archives between 1592 and 1614. Now back to the story. Teresa also spoke about the danger of complacency in marriage. She said the greatest threat to a married couple's salvation is not hatred, it is indifference. She said couples who stop caring about each other's spiritual lives are already starting to separate, even if they stay in the same house. She said the moment you stop praying for your spouse, you stop loving them the way God loves them. In 1579, Teresa was traveling from Valladolid to Palencia to found a new convent. On the road, she met a couple in their 60s. They had been married for 42 years. They told her they had never fought, not once. They were very proud of this. They said they had the perfect marriage. Teresa asked them if they prayed together. They said no, they did not need to. They were fine. Teresa asked if they talked about God. They said no. They went to Mass on Sundays. That was enough. Teresa asked if they ever corrected each other when one of them sinned. They looked confused. They said, "We do not judge each other." Teresa later wrote that she felt profound sadness for this couple. She said they had lived 42 years side by side and had never once helped each other get closer to God. They had been companions, but not partners in holiness. She said their marriage was like 2 people rowing a boat in opposite directions. They stayed in the same place, but they never moved forward. She said the saddest marriages are not the ones filled with conflict. They are the ones filled with comfort. Because conflict, at least, means both people still care. Comfort can hide the fact that both people have stopped trying. Teresa saw this danger in her vision. She saw couples in purgatory, not because they hated each other, but because they had wasted the opportunity marriage gave them. They had been given a companion for the journey, and they had treated that companion like furniture, present but ignored. She also saw that the prayers of one spouse can reach across death. In 1574, a woman named Isabel came to the monastery in Segovia. Her husband had died 6 months earlier. She was tormented by guilt. She said they had fought the day he died. She had said cruel things. He had left the house angry. He collapsed in the field while working. He was dead before the sun set. She never got to apologize. She never got to tell him she loved him. She asked Teresa if her husband was in hell. Teresa said, "I do not know, but I know God is merciful, and I know you can still help him." Isabel looked at her. "How? He is dead." Teresa said, "Pray. Offer masses for him. Fast. Give alms in his name. Your love for him did not end when he died. Use that love now. Direct it toward heaven." Isabel spent the next 3 years doing exactly that. She prayed the rosary for him every single day. She had masses said for him every week. She gave half her income to the poor in his name. And one night, she had a dream. She saw her husband standing in light. He was smiling. He said, "Thank you." Then he was gone. She woke up and knew somehow that he was free. She told Teresa. Teresa said, "You see, love does not end. It just changes form. You loved him on earth by being his wife. You love him now by being his intercessor. Both are the same love." Teresa recorded this in a letter to her brother Lorenzo, dated 1575. The letter is part of the complete correspondence held at the Abbey of Montserrat in Catalonia. She told Lorenzo that spousal love is one of the most powerful forces in the spiritual realm because it is rooted in a sacrament. She said, "Sacramental bonds do not break at death. They stretch into eternity. And the soul that prays for a deceased spouse is still honoring the vow they made at the altar." Teresa also warned against bitterness. She said if a spouse dies and the surviving partner refuses to pray for them out of anger or hurt, that refusal is a sin. She said, "You do not have to forget what they did, but you do have to forgive. And forgiveness means praying for their soul, even when your heart does not want to." She met a widow in Toledo in 1576 who had been beaten by her husband for 20 years. He died of sickness, probably tuberculosis, and the woman told Teresa she was glad he was dead. She said she hoped he was suffering. She said she would never pray for him. Teresa looked at her and said, "Then you are chaining yourself to him forever. You think his death set you free, but your hatred is keeping you bound. If you want peace, you have to let him go, and the only way to let him go is to forgive him. And the only way to forgive him is to pray for him." The woman stared at her. She said, "I cannot do that." Teresa said, "You can. It will hurt, but you can. Start with one Hail Mary, just one. Say it for him. Then walk away. Tomorrow, say another. Keep going until the hatred loosens. It will, I promise." The woman did it. She told Teresa months later that it took her 90 days to say the first Hail Mary without feeling rage. 90 days. But she kept going. And slowly, the bitterness faded. She said, "I do not love him, but I do not hate him anymore either, and that is enough." Teresa said that was one of the greatest victories she had ever witnessed. She said, "Releasing someone from the prison of your own anger is a form of resurrection. You raise them from the dead in your own heart. And that act of resurrection opens the door for God to do the same for their soul." Teresa also taught that married couples should prepare for death together. She said the greatest gift a husband and wife can give each other is the assurance that they will meet again. And the only way to give that assurance is to live in such a way that both of them are heading in the same direction. She told couples to make a pact. She said, "Promise each other that if one of you dies first, the other will pray without ceasing until you meet." Again, promise that you will have masses said. Promise that you will fast. Promise that you will not give up on each other, even in death. She said this promise should be renewed every year on the anniversary of the wedding. She said it should be spoken out loud in front of the Eucharist if possible, so that Christ himself is the witness. In 1580, Teresa wrote to a couple in Madrid who were celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary. She told them to go to the church where they were married, kneel before the altar, and renew their vows. But this time, she said, add one more line. Say, "I promise to pray for you until we meet in heaven." Say it out loud. Look each other in the eyes. Mean it. They did. They wrote back to her and said it was the most powerful moment of their marriage. The husband said he had never thought about the fact that his wife might die before him. The wife said she had never thought about praying for him after death. But now they both knew. They both understood. Their love was not ending at the grave. It was continuing. Teresa said that is what marriage is supposed to be. A partnership that outlasts the body. A bond that survives death. A covenant that stretches from the altar on earth to the throne in heaven. She saw this in her vision. The couple standing before God were not just happy, they were complete. They had finished the race together, They had pulled each other across the line, and now they were receiving the prize that only they could share. Teresa died in 1582 on October 4th in Alba de Tormes. She was 67 years old. She had founded 17 monasteries. She had written thousands of pages. She had endured sickness, persecution, and betrayal. But in her final hours, she said she had no fear. She said she knew where she was going. She said she had spent her whole life preparing for this moment, and she said she hoped to see the couples she had taught standing in heaven together, just like the vision showed her. The records show that her last words were, "My Lord, it is time to move on. Well then, may your will be done. O my Lord and my spouse, the hour that I have longed for has come. It is time to meet one another." Her body was buried in Alba de Tormes, but 9 months later it was exhumed for examination. The witnesses documented that it had not decayed. Her flesh was still soft. Her wounds from the stigmata-like marks she occasionally received were still visible. The scent that rose from the coffin was described as sweet, like flowers and incense mixed together. This was recorded by Francisco de Ribera, her first biographer, who interviewed over 100 witnesses between 1583 and 1590. His account is held in the archives of the University of Salamanca. But there is one detail most people do not know. When they opened her coffin, they found a small object clutched in her right hand. It was a wooden rosary worn smooth from decades of use. The beads were so thin in places they had almost broken through, but she had held on to it. Even in death, she had not let go. That rosary is now kept in a reliquary at the Carmel of San Jose in Avila. Pilgrims can see it under glass. It is dark with age, almost black. But if you look closely, you can still see the grooves her fingers made, the places where her thumbs pressed into the wood over and over, year after year, prayer after prayer. Teresa had spent 50 years holding that rosary, 50 years praying for others, 50 years interceding for souls, and she died the same way she lived, with her hands folded around the beads, pulling someone toward heaven. That is the image she left behind. Not a theologian at a desk, not a mystic lost in ecstasy, but a woman on her knees, holding a rosary, praying for people she loved, people she barely knew, and people who would come long after she was gone. And among those prayers, scattered across 5 decades, were the couples, the husbands and wives who came to her desperate, broken, angry, lost. She prayed for all of them. She told them the same thing every time. You are not alone. You have each other. Use that. Help each other. Carry each other. And when one of you falls, the other one prays until they stand again. She believed that. She saw it. And the vision she carried with her into death was the vision of 2 souls standing before God, hand in hand, radiant with the joy that only comes from finishing the race together. The palace they built is still there, waiting.